Welcome to the Eastham Library Chewy Decimal International Cooking Show. I'm Elaine Lipton and I am an avid home cook. I am not a professional chef, but for as long as I can remember, cooking has been my creative outlet, my stress release. It's gotten us through COVID at my house with some great meals. I spent 15 years of my life living outside of the US, studying and working and having children. I studied Indian cooking while I lived in Japan. I worked at a Chinese restaurant when I was in college and learned a lot of Chinese cooking. And everyone in my family really loves to eat all kinds of food, and it's been a great pleasure for me to cook all kinds of food. Today, I will actually be making some Indian food for you. I will make a shrimp curry in a cashew nut base, and we'll have a dessert that's made from ground carrots and sugar and milk. It's kind of a pudding. I hope that you will enjoy this. The ingredients for the shrimp curry, it consists of common Indian spices that go into a lot of curries. And the base of almost any Indian curry is browned onions. So for this recipe, I started yesterday and cut up a medium-sized onion, pole to pole, so in long slices, and then put that onion in some oil, got it started so that they started to brown, and then turned the heat down quite low and just let them cook long and slow until they turn very nice and golden brown, not burnt. And this is the kind of base that gets used in almost any curry. Indian cooks will make up a giant batch of onions like this and keep it in the refrigerator so that anytime they want to cook a curry, they can just take out a scoop full of the onions, throw it into a pan, and get started then with their spices. Lots of curries, there are spices that you actually brown in the pan just to bring out the aromatic quality of them, and then you add other ingredients. In this recipe, we'll actually be starting with the onion, and we'll add our spices, yogurt, cashew nuts to the onion, grind it all together, and then put it in the pan just like that without browning the spices first. So we have our onions, and the next thing we need are our cashew nuts. Cashew nuts need to be ground. You can do this by buying raw cashews and putting them in a blender or a food processor and grinding them up. If you're lucky, you can find them ground already. I used to buy them at Trader Joe's. They no longer sell them. This is the end of my stash, right? I keep it in the freezer. But it's really easy to take cashews on your own and actually grind them up. We have our cashew nuts ground. We have our onions already browned. We're going to put together our spice mix, and then we're going to put as much of it as we can in this little food processor. You can use a big food processor and probably fit everything you need in it. Because everything does get mixed together at the end, and the only thing that really needs to be ground up at this point are the onions. You can really start with a small food processor and do as much of it or as little of it in there as you want, and then mix everything together and put it in a pan to cook. So we're going to start now with the spice mix. 3 teaspoons of coriander powder. I started to take Indian cooking classes because I really loved Indian food, and I happen to be allergic to fresh cilantro. And lots of Indian dishes call for fresh cilantro. And I knew that one way I could get around that was to do my own cooking. With this dish too, you can use nice fresh greens to garnish it at the top at the end. Lots of people might use cilantro to do that. I don't. Next is cumin powder. We're going to put in 2 teaspoons. Cumin is a spice that you might recognize from all kinds of other cooking recipes. It's used a lot in Mexican food, and you'll recognize the smell if you open up a jar and smell it. The next thing we're putting in is a teaspoon of cayenne. this recipe will have a little bit of a kick. Curries have been around for thousands and thousands of years. The word curry, however, I think might have been something that came from during the British occupation of India. There's a 17th or 18th century recipe for curry that someone wrote in English, calls for rabbit, and I don't remember what the other protein ingredient in it was, but turmeric is a spice also goes into a lot of Indian foods. It has that really bright yellow color. It will dye anything it touches. You want to be a little bit careful with it so you don't get it on your clothes or your counter if you can. And the last thing is the garam masala. Garam masala is a spice mix. Lots of Indian people make their own. It's spices that give a nice warm flavor to things. There's often ginger in it. So now we have our spices. I'll just mix them up a little bit. Great aroma the spices have, and when these start to cook, it will just fill the room and your house with great flavor. So we're going to start with our onion. We'll put that into the bottom of our food processor. And then I think we're going to put in next our yogurt. This recipe calls for plain yogurt. Now, if you're a big yogurt eater, you might have a nice big tub of plain yogurt in your fridge. We have a tendency to eat small containers of fruity yogurt at our house. And so finding a small container of plain yogurt can be a little challenge. I was able to find one. It's exactly the right amount that I need for this recipe. And I'm going to put that in with the onions. Indian yogurt tends to be a little bit more watery than the yogurt that we eat these days, almost all of which is made on a recipe like a Greek yogurt. It's a little bit drier, a little bit thicker. It's absolutely possible to use whatever yogurt you can find. Okay, so the onions are pretty much ground up. We're going to put the nuts in now and grind that with the rest of the ingredients that are in here. And since we have the room in there, we'll put our spices in. Now we're going to mix this spice mixture with the nuts and the yogurt with some water in the pan, and we're going to cook that then for about 15 minutes. This goes right into a dry pan, and then we'll add the water. This recipe calls for 500 cc's of water. Almost all of your Pyrex measuring cups will have both cups, metric and English measurements on them, so you shouldn't have a problem figuring out how much 500 cc's is. So we're going to let that cook for a little bit till it starts to thicken. I'll go talk to you a little bit about the shrimp while we're waiting for that to warm up. So I have here a dozen raw shrimp that I have cleaned, cut, and I've cut them in half, so they're not actually whole shrimp. They're just in halves. You can buy shrimp already cleaned and use that. You can use cooked shrimp if that's your preference, and just don't cook them in the curry as long, and they won't have quite that flavor that you have for your curry. But otherwise, it's really easy just to take the cooked shrimp, and when the sauce is thick, then we'll add the shrimp and cook them for a little bit, let them then cook a little more, and then we add some ketchup and let it cook till it's done. And then we'll eat it on hot rice. Now what I've done today for the rice is to cook basmati rice, which is kind of a typical Indian rice. I've made it with coconut milk instead of all water, and that'll give it a nice creamy coconutty flavor, and I've put some dried currants in it as well. So when the rice is done, then we'll be able to just scoop our curry onto our rice. We'll eat it with some chutney or some hot mango pickle, which are also typical condiments that you can use with curries. Or if you want, you can eat your curry with naan. Now, naan is an Indian bread that's usually cooked in a wood oven, but you can buy pre-made naan, both large, garlic flavored, or even small little snack-sized naan in the grocery store. When we're done with our curry, we're going to have an Indian dessert. And that dessert is called carrot halva. Now, halva is it's a dessert name that gets used in a lot of places, both in the Middle East, in India, in Indonesia, and they're made from all kinds of different ingredients. A lot of them are made with semolina flour and sesame. This particular halva is made with ground carrots, and I made this last night because it takes quite a while to cook. But you start with carrots, you grind them up, you boil them with milk and sugar, and then once the milk has pretty much evaporated, then you take that and put it in a frying pan with some oil and you cook it till it just starts to caramelize a little bit. And you take it out and you make kind of a cake out of it, and you mix ground cardamom in it, and then put some garnish on the top. With the cardamom that goes into our dessert, the recipe calls for 4 to 6 cardamom pods. Cardamom pods look like this. I don't know if you want to see what they look like in my hand. They look a little bit like this. You can take the cardamom pod and crack it open, and there'll be some little seeds inside. And the seeds are what you use as your spice. Again, if you want, you can buy just the seed, which I don't know if it'll come out. It looks like this. All right, and I put the seed. I actually opened a pod and counted how many seeds were in one, and then took that many seeds, and I actually put them in a little mortar and pestle. You grind them up, right? So I don't know if you can see this. When they're ground, they really look like just tiny little white seeds. Mix those in with the warm carrot and let that cool, and then take your carrot out and make a cake out of it and garnish it. So just to review the spices that have gone into our curry, we have cumin, coriander, garam masala, turmeric, and cayenne. Then you add a little bit of salt to taste, and the ketchup at the end. And the ketchup actually adds a little bit of sugar to your curry, and that's one reason why you use it. Ketchup is an old, I think it's an Indonesian word, and it refers to the sauce that's kind of sweet and vinegary at the same time. So our rice is almost done now, and we'll just open up the rice cooker and mix it up a little bit. Should be very coconutty, and the raisins, the currants will give it a little bit of sweetness. See what it looks like inside, and we'll just scoop that out and put our curry on top of it. You can also, if you find that your rice is a little dry, although this is not, you can always put a little butter on it. That's also a very common Indian thing to do. Normally it would be clarified butter or ghee, but it also will just give a little bit of richness to rice that you're cooking or to any other dish you're making. I think now we're probably ready to put in our shrimp and then our ketchup. This is nice and thick. It's getting nice and thick. So the shrimp will add a little bit of liquid to the sauce. Nice little bit of seafoody flavor to it. You can make this dish with chicken too if you're not a shrimp eater. So our curry is done. It looks delicious. We'll put a little rice on a plate and then some curry on it. This is a spicy mango pickle. And you're all set for dinner.